Hello and welcome to a special program on this morning's budget. To find out how the political parties view the Finance Minister's effort, I'm joined by three of the most important politicians in Parliament. From the government, the Minister of Corporate Affairs, Salman Khurshid. From the BJP, the Leader of the Opposition in the Rajya Sabha, Arun Jaitley. And from the CPM, Politburo member and Rajya Sabha MP, Sitaram Yechury. Salman Khurshid, at the very top of his speech, the minister said that the budget would reflect the government's vision. To what extent is that vision defined by the fact that he set a date for GST and DTC, that he's announced new licenses for private banks, that he's announced a financial sector legislative reforms commission, and perhaps for many, most importantly, a status paper in 6 months curtailing government debt and reducing debt to GDP ratio to something like 68% by 2013-14. To what extent is that the heart of your vision?
Well, don't forget that this is all shoring up and consolidating the reform that we've brought about over the last 10 years. But beyond that, I think don't forget that even in a difficult time when he was very tight for money and we're just coming out of recession and a global recession at that, we've not skimped on money for the social sector. I think he's kept the social sector completely covered and supported, and I think that's part of the larger vision of the Aam Aadmi that the Congress party supports.
Sitaram Yechury, another way of looking at the vision in the budget is to point out that the finance minister has allocated 1.73 lakh crore for infrastructure, 66,000 crore for rural development, 41,000 for NREGA, 48,000 for Bharat Nirman, and then on top of that, he's also come up with a national social security fund for the unorganized workers and health insurance for all beneficiaries of NREGA. From your standpoint, is that a more acceptable vision?
Well, from my standpoint, I think this budget and the vision had declared a twin objective. And the twin objective was to stimulate growth and to contain inflation. And all this was in the name of the Aam Aadmi. Now, all that you read out now, Mr. Thapar, all that, if you look at it in the macro terms, the budget tells you that the total governmental expenditure slated for the coming year would grow by increase would be about 8%. Now, in nominal terms. In real terms, if you discount for inflation, it could well be less than what was spent last year. Now, therefore, if you look at in totality, the government is not really expanded its expenditures, and that can hardly constitute any stimulus. On the other hand, as far as inflation is concerned, you had these hikes, new duties on petroleum prices, you have this new cut in your fertilizer subsidy. All this is going to contribute to a greater level of inflation. Therefore, the vision of higher growth with less or no inflation, instead of that, we will not be able to realize our growth potential that we have, but we'll have to suffer higher prices in the bargain.
Arun Jaitley, a third way of looking at the vision that's inherent in this budget speech is the point that the opposition picked up, the fact that petrol and diesel prices are going to be badly hit, and that could possibly have a cascading effect, not just on the economy, but on every single Indian. I want to come to the substance of that vision, if that is the vision, in a moment's time. But first, was it appropriate for the opposition to walk out of a budget speech? Were there not more suitable, more appropriate ways of registering your protest?
Well, there are certainly many ways of registering your protest. 2 days ago in the Gujarat Assembly, when the budget was presented, the Congress party had walked out. Walkout is a part of a parliamentary protest. You sit through 90% of the budget, and when you find that something is very oppressive on the people, a walkout is a legitimate methodology of registering a protest. Now, let me tell you, the principal problem facing this country is that we've entered into an era of food shortages. The second, we have a huge amount of food inflation. This budget will now translate food inflation also into a non-food inflation. Sitaram just now mentioned it is the petroleum increase, it's the fertilizer increase, it's the excise duty increase. And mind you, on petroleum, this is the Pranab Mukherjee installment of the petroleum increase. That is to say, which is revenue-centric.
Absolutely.
The oil company-centric increase, which is the Murli Devra version of the petroleum increase, is yet to come, which could be here any day. Now, couple that together, you are no longer food shortage alone. you are no longer food inflation alone, you'll have a huge inflation. It won't be marginally double digit as 10-11%. It could be perhaps much more.
Let me put that to you, Salman Khurshid. That, in a sense, in fact, is the double whammy. The first whammy we've had it in terms of the increase in excise and customs on petroleum products. The second whammy is the one that Murli Deora will deliver. At the end of the day, regardless of what the finance minister thought the vision would be, the image that's going to be left behind is an inflationary budget that's going to hit the Aam Aadmi.
Listen, it's not what the experts and politicians think. It's what you will see down the road, 4 weeks and 2 months down the road. I think that you have to read this, you have to hear the budget speech in context of what was said in the Lok Sabha yesterday. The entire issue of how the food prices escalation and inflation happened, I think was put in perspective, and I think we are reasonably confident.
Can I interrupt? You're not actually answering the question. The key issue is that you've already announced one lot of increases of petrol and diesel prices. Murli Deora, when he considers the Kirat Parekh Commission reports, will be announcing a second. Are you saying to me that 4 months down the road there will be no addition because of Kirat Parekh? Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm not saying that at all. I am saying that you should put the inflation thing in perspective. I think we have a grip on inflation. It was a food inflation. It was an artificial inflation. There is no food shortage. I think please go back to Mr. Sharad Pawar's speech yesterday. We have ample food in the country. There is no problem of food.
But I'm not talking about
food. We are
food.
Confident. We are confident.
I'm afraid you and I are talking about different subjects. You're talking about food. I'm talking about general inflation that will be kicked up because of what you've done on the petrol front.
First concede the food issue to me, and then we'll talk about general inflation. As far as general inflation is concerned, that is something that we have to tackle. And of course, the food inflation, you can't say there's going to be food inflation and general inflation as well.
Your colleagues on the panel are nodding their heads with disagreement. First, you, Sitaram Yechuri, do you accept that line that they've tackled food inflation and the next thing they'll tackle is petrol?
Not at all. On the contrary, they've compounded the problem. If they really had to tackle the food inflation, there were things that were obvious, staring in your face, that should have been done. As of 10th of January, the economic survey tells you, as against a buffer norm of 200 lakh tons, you had 474 odd lakh tons. What is this extra amount lying in the Sarkari godowns, where the government is paying a huge carrying cost? Why don't you release those? Why don't you release those food grains through the public distribution system and ease the pressure on the food prices? That was not done. And what Salman said just now is absolutely right. Much of this is artificial creation. Artificial creation is being created by speculation and trading. So why are you not banning futures and forward trading, at least for some time, to control the prices?
That's certainly...
No, you're not doing the obvious things.
Let me stop you there.
They're not doing the obvious things.
Let me stop you there. You're right when you say they're not doing the obvious things with regard to food inflation. But for the moment, let's stick to petrol price inflation, because that, in a sense, as I keep insisting, might be the image with which this budget is hoisted. Arun Jaitley, your colleague Yashwant Sinha has said that the BJP will move a cut motion on this issue. Are you serious, or is that just rhetoric and a threat?
Why should it be a rhetoric or a threat? A cut motion is a legitimate parliamentary tactic. In fact, it is legitimately to be used in the course of any financial bill which comes up before the Lok Sabha. And now that you have even noises being made by at least one of the partners of the UPA that they do not support this oil hike the way it's been brought in, I think it's a legitimate, permissible political tactic for the opposition to move a cut motion on this.
Salman Khurshid, the problem is that regardless of the good of this budget, and I grant that there's a lot in this budget that is good and welcome, the stock market has shot up as it hasn't done for a long time after a budget, but as far as the press are concerned, as far as the ordinary man is concerned, the image of this budget is hijacked by what you've done in terms of petrol and diesel. After yesterday's debate on prices in Parliament, do you think the timing was wrong?
Well, timing can't be right or wrong. You have to time things with the budget. We couldn't have postponed the budget, and whatever has to be done, we've obviously considered it seriously and then announced it in the budget. And let me just tell you, the finance minister very clearly said, please hear me out. And then if you have a problem, we can talk about it, we will debate it. But a lot of these, my friends are talking about things that happened when they were not in the House. They didn't even want to listen yesterday, they didn't want to listen today.
Except that I'm pretty sure they watched it on CNN IBN when they left the House, and they may have heard it even more clearly. But leave that aside. Are you giving me also, when you say that the Finance Minister has thought this through carefully, an assurance that you won't roll this back? Are you sure that Mrs. Gandhi supports what you've done?
No. What Mrs. Gandhi feels and says, obviously you understand she's the party leader, and we cannot depart from what her instructions are, or even for that matter, what she wishes us to do. But having said that, please understand, these are not off-the-cuff remarks. This is a budget speech. A lot of work has gone into it, a lot of consultation has taken place, and a very calculated proposition has been placed before the country and before Parliament.
All right.
Now, why don't you discuss it? What is the problem about discussing it?
We actually are discussing it. Let me bring in Sitaram Yechury. Let me put to you something.
Yeah, not in Parliament.
Sitaram Yechury, you just heard Salman Khurshid say that Mrs. Gandhi is our leader. We can't depart from what she says or what she wishes. Is that a hint that Mrs. Gandhi is going to, from behind the scenes, ensure some rollback on this increase in petrol and diesel?
Well, if the armed army is the concern, this has to be rolled back, because you can't rub salt into their wounds at this moment by doing this. This is not a small increase, Mr. Thapa. You have put a 1 rupee charge on petrol and diesel. You have restored 5% import duty on crude oil. You've increased customs duty on petrol and diesel to 7.5%. This is going to lead up to a hike in the prices of at least ₹3 per litre.
Okay.
Now, this will have such a cascading effect. It will have such a cascading effect in the movement of food grains all across the country. So food prices, far from being controlled, is going to escalate tremendously.
Arun Jaitley, your leader of the opposition Arun Jaitley, your leader of the opposition in the Rajya Sabha, you're getting what I am interpreting as the first hints that Mrs. Gandhi as the leader might be the person who's going to push the Prime Minister to roll this back. If that rollback happens, will you see it as a triumph for the opposition and the first significant setback for the government?
Well, I am not into calculating victories or defeats or what goes on in the minds of a leader of the Congress party. But if they have, as Sitaram rightly puts it, some legitimate concern as far as the average common man is concerned, then the burden on him has to be reduced at this stage. He is already burdened with a hike in his food bills. The excise duty hike, the hike in other commodities as a result of which, and the petrol diesel hike is all going to add not only to food, it's going to add further to food plus all other commodities.
All right.
And I see a cascading effect on inflation. I think some feeling of relief to the common man must come. And if the Congress party leader ever were to decide a rollback, it will be a welcome phenomenon.
Gentlemen, let's take a break at that point. We've talked about the politics. We've talked about the inflammatory issue of the petrol diesel hike. After the break, let's come to the economics, to the question of the fiscal deficit. Is it really reduced to 5.5, or is there some trick in that? And the manner in which the finance minister's handled the stimulus. Has he been deft, or has he been perhaps just a bit too clever? That's in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Face the Budget with Sitaram Yechury, Arun Jaitley and of course Salman Khurshid. Gentlemen, let's come now to the economics. Salman Khurshid, the Finance Minister has announced a 5.5% fiscal deficit target with no off-budget items. Do you think he's relying a little bit too heavily on achieving 25,000 from disinvestment, from a successful 3G license auction, and of course achieving that miraculous 8.5% growth? Is there a certain amount of risk behind this 5.5%?
Well, there's always risk in something that you do, but let me just tell you that a very good team supporting the finance minister and a very good prime minister have all looked at the figures and the sums, and we've then presented them to the House, and nobody's pointed out a flaw, nobody's pointed out a mistake.
Well, forgive me, no one's had time to point out a flaw. It's only been a couple of hours since the finance minister sat down. Let me quickly bring in Arun Jaitley. You heard Salman Khurshid admit that there's an element of risk. How much risk is inherent in the hope of 25,000 crore from disinvestment, particularly when the stock market, even if it was ecstatic today, has been pretty wobbly and shaky for the last month?
I don't think the stock market is really a composite indicator of the kind of things to come. Let's take the three factors that you mentioned. Now, as far as disinvestment is concerned, it has a potential to raise 25,000 crores or more in the next year. But then this government has been always reluctant, and there have been pulls and pressures within the government which have slowed down disinvestment. So I'll still keep my fingers crossed as to how much they raise out of disinvestment. As far as the spectrum sales are concerned and the 3G licenses are concerned, I think this government has had a scandalous record. What we've debated in Parliament, outside in the media, has clearly shown that the 2G licenses were sold for a song, and now you already have too much of 2G spectrum in the market. I am not so sure as to how much the 3G is going to recover for them as far as the month of April is concerned, when the auctions are due.
Sitaram Yechuri, listening to Arun Jaitley, he is not completely confident because of the problem with 3G licenses that the government will achieve 5.5, although it might. But clearly the government is indicating that when it comes to 2011, they've actually raised the target Mr. Mukherjee announced last year in July of 4% for the fiscal deficit to 4.8. So is the government accepting that the real problem is next year, not this?
Well, I think the problem is the past year, this year, and the next year. Because, you see, it's not only a question of the targets that are being announced, but how are these targets going to be met? For instance, this year's target was met by a huge non-spending of the capital expenditures that you budgeted in the last year's budget. Now, if you don't spend your capital expenditures, you are undermining the economic fundamentals, because gross capital formation is the basis for any economy to build up its growth potential. Now, if you're going to meet your fiscal deficit targets by undermining or cutting your capital expenditures, that is like cutting the branch on which you're sitting.
Okay.
So I think even if you achieve these targets, it will be at a very, very, very serious expense and cost to the economy, and therefore there should be a rethink on this process. Instead, meet this deficit and target. No, one moment. Instead, meet this deficit and target, but not by not foregoing your revenue collections.
Okay.
Pranab Mukherjee has shown that he's foregone 5 lakh crores.
Okay.
5 lakh crores in the last year.
Let me stop you there on the deficit. I want to move in the limited time left to us to the other big critical economic issue, the manner in which the government is handling the pullout from the stimulus. Salman Khushri, there's no doubt that industry today has been full of praise. You've only raised the excise duty by 2%. You've held service tax where it was. The problem is that the net increase in revenue for the government is only 20,000 crore. And that suggests that you're relying heavily on better compliance. Again, is that a risk? Because better compliance may or may not happen.
But what's wrong with it? No, listen, if you don't want to risk living, then you don't go out of your house, you don't cross a road, you don't breathe the air that everybody breathes. But that's not the way we live. We are not a timorous government. We are a confident government. We know we have the right talent, and we know what we are doing. It wasn't easy for the finance minister to say that the plan outlay of the 11th plan, first time this is going to happen after a long time, that we will fulfill the entire plan outlay. Now, you can't just simply say, no, we don't believe this, and therefore this won't happen. Well, just wait and you'll see it'll happen.
Well, he says just wait and you'll see it happen. But Arun Jaitley, is there not also a beautifully, comfortably disguised stimulus in the way the finance minister has broadened tax slabs and reduced the corporate surcharge to 7.5%? That's going to put money into the hands of consumers who'll spend, and that will keep the stimulus going. Was that not a clever trick?
Well, let me give you a twofold reply on this. Firstly, in the direct tax code as it is planned, 1.6 to 10 lakhs is a 10% slab. But that 10% slab comes into force next year from 1st April 2011. Now, all the exemptions go out except one. Now, the net outgo of the taxpayer once that happens is actually going to be much more than what he actually pays. Now, what he has done this year is only a halfway step in that direction. Secondly, even for this year, where there may be some relief to taxpayers in this category, the fringe benefit tax liability has already fallen on the employee. That's by a CBDT circular in the fourth quarter.
Sure.
So all the employees are now going to be
Yeah.
burdened with all the perquisites that they get and the fringe benefits. Therefore, this burden also may well offset the little advantage they may get in this one limited year.
Very quickly, Sitaram Yechuri, we've seen
No,
a stimulus that will affect urban India and industry. Is there enough of a stimulus for agriculture? Agricultural growth is languishing poorly. Very quickly on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, this budget, if you ask me, has what I would call a counter stimulus. It is not going to provide a stimulus, but on the contrary, it may well lead to the contraction of the economy due to lack of domestic demand. Remember last year, Mr. Thapar, last year the biggest stimulus came not from the economic policies, it came from the 6th Pay Commission and the general elections. General elections in India is the biggest direct transfer of money to the common man without any delivery costs and without any middlemen. Now, both these are not going to be there this year. And with the fuel and the food price inflation, there'll be very little left in the hands of the people to spend. And that is where I fear it could set in a contraction.
Oh, that Sitaram Yechuri was spoken like a true politician. A general election is the best way of transferring money to the people of India. On that note, when I think many of the audience are probably wryly smiling, my thanks to you for joining me. My thanks also to Salman Khurshid and Arun Jaitley. And if you have been, thanks for watching. And now we carry on with the news.